Okay, everybody, so we're going to get started modeling a room. In this case, we're going to model the interior of a kitchen. And when you first look at the preview for this, you might think that it's maybe a little overwhelming, or that this is a lot more advanced than the previous lessons we've been working through. But in reality, we're going to be using pretty much all of the same commands and tools that we've already learned. I'm going to introduce just a few more things, but you're going to see that a principle that we stress in learning basically any CAD program applies to SketchUp as well, and that's that we use about 20% of the commands 80% of the time. So to model this kitchen, we're going to be using the same commands, rectangle, push-pull, rotate, move, the tape measure tool. We're going to be using all of those tools and more that we've gone through and gone over to model something maybe a little bit more complex than what we've done so far. So I'm looking forward to it, and we're going to get started. And before we get started, another thing I'd like to give you the opportunity to do is to customize your workspace just a little bit. Now, I honestly have no problem using this basic toolbar that we have on top, but I know that a lot of people have other preferences, and if you wanted to change, which keys you can access, or which icons you can access, you can go to View, Toolbars, and if you want to, you can deselect that Getting Started toolbar. And what a lot of people like to use, and what I'm going to use for this model, is the large tool set. So we have all of the same tools that we had in the Getting Started toolbar, but now we also have some more that would normally be nested under our drop-down menu at the top. So, a few more options. Now, to get started with this kitchen, we are going to start with the overall dimensions of the room. So I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I'm going to go 10 feet. So I'm going to put in this apostrophe for feet by 15 feet. So 10 feet, comma 15. And I'm going to push-pull it to a height of 9 feet. And since we're working on an interior, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this line so that we can reveal what's going on inside. Now I'm going to start with what's along the walls, and in this case it's going to be the windows, and then we'll get to the cabinetry. So to start with these windows, we are going to use the tape measure tool. We're going to go over from this edge 4 feet. So again, our default units are inches, so we have to put in feet, or we could put in 48, right, if we didn't want to put the units in, right? 48 inches for 4 feet. And in this case, the top of the window comes down 1 foot 7.5 inches. And depending on which CAD software we're using, there are different ways to input whole inches and parts of an inch. So for SketchUp, if you'll notice, I'll hit backspace here. When I have my feet, I can just put that in and put the unit, and then I can go right to the number of inches. And then if I have a whole inch and parts of an inch, right, in this case I'm putting in 7.5, I can type in 7 space 1/2 inches. Or I could do 7.5. Oh, but in this case, I wasn't tracking down along the blue axis, so this actually gave me the correct distance, but not in the direction I wanted to go. So let's do that one more time, making sure we're tracking downward. 1 foot 7.5. Okay, so that's the top of our window, and now the length and width of our window are going to be 2 foot 8 by 3 feet. And now to give this window some detail, we're going to use a tool that we've used earlier, but we didn't really get into too much detail about, and that's the offset tool. So if you recall, the offset tool will create parallel lines at a specified distance. Right? So if I wanted to create lines inward to create the frame for this window, I can click once on the edge here, drag in, And now I can type in 2 to offset inward 2 inches. And then I'm going to do that again, another inch. And then I'm going to break this up into 4 panes. If you notice, I'm using my inference points here, right, to draw a line from midpoint to midpoint. And I'm going to use offset again. And right now, if you notice, what I have selected, kind of by default, is this outside shape. If I want to make sure I can select this inside shape, I can hit escape. It's going to deselect that face. Now I can go in 1/2 inch. And just like with push-pull, SketchUp remembers what my last input was. So I just offset 1/2 inch. Now I can just double click these faces to get that 1/2 inch offset. Now I want to delete these lines that I just created for reference. So now that I've created the detail for this window, I can just go ahead and push-pull a bit to give it some depth. Now there are different ways to use push-pull and inferencing to replicate a distance, right? So just like we've done before, I can click on this face and then I can reference or inference this other face. I can also double click, right? Because again, SketchUp remembers my previous inputs. Okay, so now that I have my first window completed, I'm going to use my first window to help me create my second window because they're actually identical. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another guideline, in this case 5'6" over from this guideline on my right. I'm going to make a window that is also 2'8" wide. So I'll create the outside shape with my rectangle tool. And now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using offset and push-pull to recreate the second window, but I'm going to be using inferencing so that I don't need to type in every single dimension, right? So if I click on this initial shape, and then I can reference the lines from the other window, it's going to give me that 2-inch offset, and then again that 1-inch offset. Now I will create my individual panes by breaking this up just like I did before. Use offset again. With a combination of inferencing and double clicking. I'll delete these away. Cool. So now with push-pull, it's the same thing. I can pull out my face and reference the faces on my other window. And now I have 2 identical windows. Now I wanted to show you that to demonstrate the power of inferencing. But there's another way we could have done it that's even quicker. And we really could have, and I'd like to, just copy this window, right? Copy it and move it over here. But before we do that, we need to make this window a component, right? Because we're going to have 2 copies of the same window, and we're likely to make changes to this, right? We're definitely going to add colors and materials to this window. So what I really want to do, hopefully you caught on that you're going to undo that window or delete that window. And you're going to use a window select to select this window we've created. You're going to right click and you're going to make it a component. And we're just going to name that window. We're going to make sure that replace selection with component, this should always be checked off. If you don't have this checked off, what it's going to do is it's going to create a component. You'll have a stored component of this, but the window or whatever object you have that's on the screen will not be an example of that component. I'll show you what I mean by that. So right now I have it checked. Hit create, and now when I select this, the entire window selects, right? The entire component is selected. If I undo that, right, I just hit edit undo. Right click, make component. If I deselect this, it's going to seem like I didn't create a component. So I actually do have a component of this window, but this is not an example of it. So I just hit Control Z a couple times to undo that, and I'm going to do it the right way now. Cool. So now that I have that component, I'm just going to make sure it's selected as it is, use my move tool, and make sure I move it from an inference point, hold Control to make a copy, and place that window where it belongs. Okay, so now we have our walls, 2 windows, and we're going to get ready to start making the cabinetry. And before I go any further, if you notice, I made these windows a component, right? It's one component and a copy of that component. And we're going to be adding a lot more things to these walls that are going to be making contact with the walls that we don't want to share lines or faces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to triple click these walls, right click, and I'm going to choose Make Group. And when I do that, you're going to notice that where the windows are, they actually filled in. So what I want to do is select my windows, my components here. I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to hide them temporarily. And then I want to edit this group. So I can do that by double clicking or right clicking and choosing Edit Group. The reason why that filled in is we have these openings that were created when we created our windows. But now that we separated our windows, right, we made them components and we made this wall a separate group, that opening has kind of been healed on its own. So we're going to trace out these rectangles, select the faces, and cut them out. Okay, so now if I bring my windows back, I'm going to unhide. Now we're in business, right? So we have our walls as groups and our windows as components.